Hello and welcome to this, the second episode of The Height of It. Today we have a local legend, musician, Flook frontman, Renaissance man. It's Brian Finnegan.
Drum roll. Thanks for having me, guys.
Welcome to The Height of It. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Yeah, great.
Lovely. Let's get stuck in then. So you're recently just off a little tour with Flook.
I am, 30th anniversary. We're celebrating 30 years this year, so we thought we'd try and do a few more gigs than we normally do. We've become a bit of a boutique gig band since we got back together after our wee mini sabbatical. And before we took a break, Matt, we were maybe doing upwards on 180, 200 gigs a year. And then we stepped back, have kids and wear a few different musical hats. And when we came back together, we made a conscious decision, not to get too bogged down in long tours. So we pick and choose now.
Okay, that's good. What kind of timeline are we looking at here? When did you guys form? When did you take a break? When are you back?
Well, 30 years this year, so 95 we got together. And then I think it was 2018 we stepped back. Mm-hmm. Sarah had her first daughter, her only daughter, and that just felt like a right time to, because I think when you're so invested in any one thing, especially creatively, people just, they don't ask you to get involved because they know you're not available, So there was quite a lot of nice stuff that was kind of percolating, but it was the nature of the band, I think we invested everything in that, and then after like a decade and a half, you kind of realize that you get sucked into that cyclical nature of recording albums and then touring them like crazy and then recording an album. And so we kind of formed our own record label, and that afforded us this lovely luxury of being patient. So we weren't trapped in that, record company demands and, and I think that's something, I think maybe Flook were one of the first bands to do that, because I think it's such an overrated thing in creativity to be patient, and so we just waited for the music to arrive. But we'd done enough albums to be aware and conscious enough that we could keep doing the same thing, and we didn't want it to become a formula. So that was another factor behind just saying, right, let's step back and look at the picture here for a little while.
So there were 4 studio albums, but the first one was actually a live album. So how did that, which is strange, not usual the way to do it.
I know, you think the greatest hits and the live ones come near the end when you've run out of ideas, don't you?
So how come?
Well, because the formation of the band was a strange kind of stumble. It was a mutual friend called Becky Morris who knew the 3 major flute players, myself, Mike McGoldrick and Sarah Allen. She knew us independently of each other. She was from Manchester, Mike was from Manchester, and I think she had an offer for a flute festival, and she reached out to Mike. Then she knew Sarah from her days in the Barley Works and Big Jig, got in contact with her, and Sarah and I had just become good friends because she had come along to a gig that I'd done in England with Upstairs in a Tent, and so it was a long weekend of gigs that Becky decided to put together, and we did 2 of them I think, and then on the 3rd we called in Ed Boyd, who was studying languages at University of Manchester and had got into music from finger-picking guitar, John Renburn stuff, but then went to Manchester, found the Irish session scene, met Mike McGoldrick. And so Mike said, I know this guy from Bath in Somerset, we'll call him, come and do the last gig. And Ed came on board, and it was fantastic. It just transformed. It was a kind of novelty, 3 flute players all playing over the top of each other. And he just solidified it. The colour, the chord colour that he chose, fantastic rhythm guitar player. And there was a nice reaction to that last gig. So we thought maybe this is a wee bit more legs than a long weekend. And it also coincided with Mike having won the BBC Young Folk Musician of the Year.
Right.
So as a vehicle for that prize, he got to play all the big festivals. So I mean, it was so fortuitous because that normal evolution of any band that were starting from scratch, you know, that would have taken 5 years to have been playing main stage Cambridge. But we hit the ground running, and then Becky she knew that, you know, the one thing to glue it all together had to be a product. So she didn't even tell us she was recording Sidmouth Festival. She just multi-tracked it through the desk, and yeah. Didn't even ask us do we want to release it. She said, "You're releasing it on," and that's how live.
Do you enjoy listening to that? Is it?
No.
Yeah.
And I had to recently because Flook have just finished a tune book, you know, 30 years of tunes, and it was harrowing at times just to go back and listen to some of the early. But I mean, that's just what, you know, that's what it is, and that's how it was back then. But yeah.
I remember getting it. I was living abroad at the time, and I remember buying this Flook CD and enjoying it as it was new and different. And I mean, through your career, you've described Flook as very difficult to pigeonhole and to label in terms of their style. And it's, you know, it's not this and it's not that. It's not Irish. It's not English. It's how do you describe Flook? How do you identify the band? What words do you use?
I think when just personally for myself, it's I struggle to put words to music, you know, even just to explain what it is that I do, because I think the music explains it. But you know, you have to have content online where you're telling people who have never heard it before, and I just think it's this kind of distillation of 4 very different personalities who have very unique stories, articulating their story in sound and music, you know, because we write a lot of tunes, and so over the years we've got more honed at doing that, and I think that, you know, when you're doing a lot of traveling, you know, travel opens you to people and places and moments and cultures all over the world. And you realise that there are no others. We're all the same, and so where we connect in music, and where music connects in us, and others connect in the same place, is in the stories of life. You know, they're all the same emotions. You know, hopes, dreams. You know, suffering, joy, anything that'll light the way. So, when I think about music, that's how I think about Flook. I think that lovely luxury of not having to write an Irish album or an English folk album or a Scottish album allowed us this peripheral view of the world. We were under no pressure to do that, so we just played music that we loved, that hit us in the right spot. And if we were short of music, we wrote it ourselves. I mean, that's a long soundbite, isn't it? Really, you're trying to explain. But yeah,
but in record shops, where do Flook CDs?
Oh, well, they sit in folk. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're always in the folk section. Yeah,
you've got quite a big fan base everywhere. It's not like you can go tour. You've toured Sweden, France, Spain, almost every country, and you get a crowd. So I think that speaks to what you're saying. You don't get all the Irish expats coming for trad music or all the Scottish people coming for folk music. I think the music, what you're saying there, speaks to people through the personalities and through the rhythm of the music that you put out. Yeah. So it's very difficult to I suppose you need to categorize it for record labels and commercial reasons and all that, but the fan base kind of reflects that there's no label. It's 4 people that got together, like you said, and basically pour their heart and soul out in musical form. Maybe that's what's carry. You seem to have a really zen approach to the whole thing, doing your own record label, coming together and just playing without labels, without forcing it and stuff like that. Is that the kind of vibe?
It was an unusual band, and it still is, because, you know, there isn't any one decision that is made without 4 people talking about it, and, you know, which is a healthy relationship. You know, there's no one in charge. And in the early days, I guess we were a bit of a nightmare to work with for agents and, you know, in that world, because they wanted a plan. They wanted, like, not even just like a summer plan. They wanted, next year, guys, come on, you need to know what's going on. When's the new album? And we honestly were never ambitious. there wasn't an ambitious bone in Flook. Ambitious for the music, you know, because we wanted to give it the best that we had, but we weren't out to conquer the world. We just wanted to do things quietly. You know, there were enough people making a big sound about it, and I know kind of the way that I think. I'd rather tread softly and let the music do the talking. And it never really changed. And I think maybe just that's what captured people's imagination at the beginning. That it had this, it's almost like a fragrance of it. That was, you know, you catch an art sometimes and you just don't know what it is, but you realise that it's honest and it's telling the truth. Because if I go to see art or hear music, I want to believe it. You know, I don't want to think I've heard that somewhere else before, you know, and it's dressed up in someone else's clothes.
For maximum ticket sales or maximum album sales, formulaic.
Yeah, you know, and the way there's quite a lot of art now, especially now, it's just going sideways because it's commercial. But we're at a juncture in time, you know, where if you're an artist, you have to be going forward, even if it's not popular. You know, so I think people, even back then, 30 years ago, and I was always nervous about, because I had played in a band that weren't based in Ireland, you know, with 3 English musicians or British musicians, and so for me coming home, I always felt that it was, that's kind of slightly, I wouldn't say sold out, but you know, I had to go to England to make a living, where there was a kind of school of thought that, you know, if you were worth your salt, you could make a living by being here on the island. So, and then it was only in my head, because if, you know, as soon as we would put out word of a gig, it would sell out, you know, and it'd be
over here.
Yeah. And there'd be quite a few, you know, loads of great players who would come to gigs, which was also an indicator that we were doing the right thing.
So where did the nervousness come from? Why did you feel a bit wary about gigging in Ireland then, at the beginning?
I don't know. Maybe it just comes back to, you know, growing up in Armagh, you know, at the time that we did, with the connotations about, you know, being based in England, you know, and maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just my own insecurity. Maybe I wasn't sure of the music in the early days. I didn't know how it would be received, because there is a definite undercurrent in trad music to lambast, you know, anything that's slightly left field or off piste. You know, that you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be mixing it with beats, you shouldn't have guitar, you shouldn't have syncopation, it should have a regional style.
That still exists?
Oh God, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that gathered pace even after Riverdance. There was a lot of people in the pure side of trad who were horrified by what Riverdance was doing. It became a global phenomenon, and you know, suddenly there were so many bands all around the world who wanted to play like that. And I guess, you know, if you come from France or Japan or Spain or wherever you come from, and you fell in love with Irish trad music, the way that music was starting to be shared, the accessibility to it, it's just there as a click of a button, you know. So you could choose the tunes that you wanted to learn, the cool ones, you know, that meant something to you. And so your vocabulary was completely without structure. It's like building a house on sand. You know, you didn't grow up playing the tunes that were the part of the vernacular. It's the kind of lilt and song of the not even the country, but the county. So I you know, there was a lot of chatter about, you know, how much damage Riverdance did to Irish music, because it was, you know, it exposed people to all this new music that was mixing it up with Balkan rhythms, and you know, that wasn't Irish trad music.
So
people
that
were
was the
getting
turning point. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you were a bit worried
Blinkered.
then that the same sort of thing, here comes Brian Finnegan with musicians that aren't from here, mixing
I
up
had
different
that kind of
styles.
narrative in the back of my mind, you know, that, you know, that you shouldn't rather than you should have because I grew up in the Pipers Club, you know, and the most glorious thing about being a student of the Pipers Club was there was none of that.
That's the Pipers Club in Armagh here. Yeah.
The Valley, Brian and the Valley, and Armagh Pipers Club, you know, and their approach to teaching, empowering children to be culturally and musically literate was have a go. There's nothing to do with regional style. It's about you.
Okay.
How can you best express yourself? And so, and you know, for a child, that's like hugely potent
Mm-hmm.
to have that trust of an adult saying, you don't have to play like anyone else. What you bring to the party is enough, and play it loud and proud. And
This was a formative experience for you then?
yeah,
Was this the first time you'd picked up these instruments, that you play the flute and
the Pipers Club?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What age
most
were you
kids,
then?
most kids who went to the Pipers Club all had a ground for 6 months a year on the whistle,
Right.
just to see, you know, if music caught fire, because banjos were expensive and pipes were even more expensive. And so, yeah, that's what I thought, because there was no music in my family. My mum and dad didn't. They weren't musicians. But they were both involved with the civil rights and the Armagh Athletic Club, which the Valley family were also involved with. Brian was the president of the Armagh ASC. And so we kind of got into music through the door of sport.
Okay.
So I was always jealous of friends who grew up, you know, with their ears pressed against the floorboards, listening to sessions and storytelling upstairs, because I didn't. I grew up with, I think there's 3 records in our house. There's Patti Smith, Easter, Bob Dylan, Blood in Their Tracks, and Rolling Stones.
That's surprising to me, that there's no musical background in your family, given the prolific nature of your music production. How old were you when you first started playing?
8.
Okay.
Well, when I first started learning, yeah, I was
Yeah.
8 years
Was there a eureka moment where you picked up the flute and you started to play, or the whistle, and loved it, or was it a progression?
I think it was an unfurling, because I had bad asthma when I was a child, and spent quite a bit of time in and out of hospital, and you know, it seemed particularly cruel that I would be asked to play an instrument that was challenging me. However, you know, when you look back at things, you can just see how it was all aligning, because I was doing quite a lot of thinking about breath and where breath was coming from, and finding extra space for it, because I was, you know, labouring, and B, I felt that, you know, I was left behind. Kind of life had left me behind a wee bit, because I wasn't able to do the things that pals were doing at school. You know, I was struggling, and I was in and out, and I was sickly all the time. I had bad allergies. And my granny I live in the house now that my grandmother Kathleen was born in. You know, and it was torturous, because we used to visit on a Sunday, and she'd like a dozen cats, and I had a raging allergy to cats as well as being everything else. So I was just like, any photos I saw of myself as a youngster, it just looked so ill, you know, red eyes and swollen cheeks. And so, you know, when music came calling, for a while I was all at sea. You know, it was just such an alien idea to be playing music, and then on top of that, the breath. Didn't enjoy the first 6 months at all. It was in the Pierce Oaks boxing club as well, which probably didn't help. You know, it's freezing cold on a Tuesday night. These 2 guys, and this wee huddle of terrified kids going da 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 da. And
one's asthmatic
everywhere. Yeah. But I guess, you know, at some point, because at the end of every lesson, Ethna would say, right, take that tune home, and there's another tune, you know, and see if you can get the first master the one that I've given you tonight, and then have a look at that one. And I remember going home, maybe 6 months in, and playing over this tune, and then flipping the page, you know, and looking at that one, and figuring out how the notes all linked with the numbers, because they had an unusual system. You know, you had the notation of the tune, and then underneath it, for ease, there was the numbers of the holes that you had to cover. So I wasn't great at music, but it made sense that, you know, and I'll still write shorthand. My tunes will all come out in numbers. Which is like, it just looks like somebody's just thrown a calculator at people. But so I looked through the next one and played that, and then I went back the next week, and I think I had 10 of them that I knew by heart, and that was the moment, I think, you know. So Ethna asked me to play it, and I played it, and she said, "I didn't ask you to learn that one, you know." did you do the next one? Play it. I did it. And I could just see in her eyes, you know, that she was watching me more closely. Which is also the remarkable thing about them, because a kid doesn't know what they're good at. So kids will just do anything.
Mm-hmm. So when you were bringing your music, this new discovery that you'd made back into the family where there was less music, or very little music, as you said, was that, how was it? How were you received when you began picking up the tin whistle and making noise in the family home? What was the reaction?
You know, my two sisters had beat me to it. They were already in the Pipers Club, so I was, or maybe the youngest one was, Claire. But yeah, they then got fiddles, and they did a bit of singing as well. My sister Morna. But yeah, once there was music in the house, that was it. It was like it had always been there. You know, my mum, because my dad was a builder, he was a bricklayer, and he worked away. But my mum was invested in it. You know, she would have took us to Pipers Club regardless of the weather, and stood outside in the elements waiting. And then to the flas, you know, during the summer, like the flaccules. That was the kind of rite of passage, I guess, when you were at a certain level. You know, it was just, that's where the order you would have competed, and then in various like solo trios, group of cool, right up to the All Ireland, if you were lucky enough to get that far. And if you were lucky enough to get that far, it kind of structured the family holiday. You know, because just get a week away, you know, and you got a scholarship for the Scalatia, which led up to the final, which meant that the family, you know, got to put up the tent in the field for the guts of 10 days. So, no pressure.
It seems so unlikely that there's no musical history in the family, but your mum is still pushing and pushing and pushing, bringing you every Tuesday night. You're in a cold boxing club, you can't breathe. You're playing a breathing instrument, you don't like it, and still persisted. Everyone persisted. Your mum persisted, your family persisted, you persisted, the club persisted. There's just an element here of, like you said, you need to draw the interest and the talent out of the children. And without all those people and that push, you probably never would have gotten into what you get into. There'd be no Flook, all that music wouldn't be around.
Yeah.
That is just an unbelievable...
Yeah, no, I think that, you know, I mean, when I said there was no music in the family, my great-grandfather, Frank Stars, was played in a pipe band.
Was that his real name, Frank Stars? He was born to be a musician, that guy, wasn't he?
Yeah, 2 R's, Stars. Anyway, so he was a blacksmith, and he would have walked from Blackwatertown to Ballybrawley every morning to... do blacksmithery for the local landowner, who thought a lot of them and built him a croft, like a wee forge that is now my house. You know, and he would have practiced his pipes in what is now my kitchen. You know, and you know, there's no photos of him, and there's no recordings, obviously, of him playing. But I just, any time I'm writing, and I write a lot, you know, all of the stuff that comes with voltage, and it just drops in that kitchen. It freaked me out for a while at the beginning, and then I learned how to love it, you know, because I realised that, because, you know, as the older I get in music, I realise that music, it comes from beyond time. It's travelling towards you in ever decreasing circles, and it's up to you, you know, how ready for you or how tuned you are into that frequency. And once you start tuning into that frequency, and out of all the other frequencies are clatter and distraction, you realise that the ghosts and gods that also come with music are travelling from very long ago. And so I believe that that place in the house, the spot, it's just got strong creative energy. So I think he's in the tunes that I write.
I love that. I love that thinking about music. A lot of people think that you create the music, but maybe the music creates you. It's out there.
No, I just receive it.
You receive it. Where do you think it comes from? Do you think it's different? Do you think it's that there's an element in the land, in the mythology around the land? Do you think that because people talk about trad tunes in the old days disappearing. I remember someone was telling me about a tune that disappeared into Donegal, and it came back about 50 years later because there was no mass communication, and it was different. It had its own flavour, and you can tell people back then could say, oh, that's a Donegal accent on that tune there.
Yeah. And music, you know, it just, because it's an oral tradition, it changes in, you know, very small ways and maybe not so small ways as it travels and as other musicians carry it. Because it's almost like a matrushka doll, you know, it's like stories unfolded around other stories. So as you play, as you breathe, or as a tune blows through you with that kind of oceanic power, it has your story. It has to, you know, and then someone else might learn your version of it and put that spin on it as well, especially if they're playing it from the right place. So
it's alive, isn't it? I mean, it's also eternal, because
of course it is, yeah.
People playing tunes 200 years ago are all dead, but the tune's still alive. It lives, and it morphs, and it chooses.
Yeah, which is just like, you know, if you think about what we're here for on this like moment, it's because that's what it is. That we have a moment. But what a moment if you get to do the thing that brings you alive. You know, if the thing, you know, I think that we're, as human beings, what we want is we want to, well, be seen, and also to sing that song, to sing our song out into the world, you know, and when I'm gone, long after I'm gone, people will still be playing my tunes, you know.
And your fingerprints will be all over the music that still travels through the ether.
Yeah. So it is it's a miraculous thing. I've kind of learned to love the questions. I know that's coining a phrase, Raina Maria Rilke, but it's the truth. You know, I stopped trying to figure out what was happening and just celebrated it.
So when you sit down to write music, you don't sit down and you say, right, this note will sound good with this and this and this. It's more of a deep creative process to allow it to wash over you and transmit through you.
Yeah, I think, you know, I have to be feeling it. So whatever's going on, if everything's harmonious and the flowers are all in bloom and the kids are all happy, and I find it very hard to write. You know, I'm not creative. I'll go through the pages and then I'll just think, I'm old enough to know now that you can't sneak up on it like that. You know, so I always, if I have to write, if I feel the urge or that I'm compelled to write, it's because something's not right. Something is out of sorts, whether it's, you know, something in the family, something in the world, something inside me, you know, but that's just, it doesn't feel right. I'm confused, I'm lost, I don't know what to do next, you know. So and music articulates that emergency really, really quickly, if I'm ready for it, you know. The other side is that, you know, I have to be ready for it, and I have to commit to be. The brilliant American poet Mary Oliver, she likened that commitment to Romeo and Juliet. She said, if you imagine that, you know, Juliet's on our balcony and she's waiting for Romeo to turn up with his lute, and he's watching the football in the pub with his mates, you know, or he's late, he's stuck in traffic, and he's a whole list of excuses of why he's not there on time. You wouldn't have had that great love affair. So you have to take it seriously, because if you don't take yourself and that relationship seriously, it will not take you seriously. It's really cautious.
Right.
You know, it doesn't want to look silly, so it needs to know that you're serious, and or it'll stay silent a lifetime, and it often does. You know, so it'll stick its head in the door, and it'll see if your chops are sharp, if you're quiet enough. If you're committed to being, for me physically, I have to be in one corner of my house at exactly the same time every night, more or less within 30 minutes after the kids go to bed. And I create a space, you know, where I make myself an interesting or semi-interesting place for music maybe to want to visit, and then I wait, and sometimes it doesn't happen for weeks. But I keep going back, and I make that space, and I don't grasp And then one night I'll be in the room and something else is in the room with me, and then it just pours through me for weeks and weeks and weeks.
That's incredible.
Is there a relationship between like stability in your life when you feel, you know, things are smooth and fine and settled, and that those coincide with fallow songwriting, composing periods in your life? Do you need some sort of unsettledness within you to produce more?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I don't think that's the rule of thumb, because I do think that you can be really creative and happy at the same time. You know, things can be going well. It's just for me, I feel that, you know, I'm father of 2 small children, and there's a lot of movement around, you know, when I'm travelling. And I used to think in the old days that that suited me, that I was more productive on the move. But then COVID came, and I just had to reevaluate everything that I did around music, because I wasn't moving. And I realised that I was far more productive being still, you know, making space for it, and really listening carefully. Yeah, and I think, you know, I think human beings are just like little antennae, you know, out in a field. You know, we're just like, every one of us is tuned into a different frequency. And so the music, something, art or poetry or recitation or whatever it is that, you know, if that resonates deeply enough inside you, might just completely miss me, you know. And so I think that for me, as someone who creates, I've just learned over the years how to tune into that frequency, and that frequency for me is about articulating difficult times and emergency. And I know that when they're coming through me, they're only on their way somewhere else, because they're for anyone who has a hunger to hear them. And so I kind of, in a way, give birth to them, and then I let them go. But it's incredible, you know, because you know, we were talking before we went on air about, you know, accepting when people step up to you after a gig. It used to make me really uncomfortable, because when I finished playing, I'm totally empty. I'm completely quiet. I don't need the hang. I don't need the drink or the party. I just want to go to bed. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's always been like that for me. You know, and a lot of musicians that I play with or have in the past get really down after a gig, really depressed. You know.
Really. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think when you're playing music, you're kind of you're probably opening doors inside that are pretty sore, you know, because if you're really honest about your music and your art, you know, you're dipping into kind of maybe past old hurt or sadness or whatever it is, because that's, you know, that makes it so much more believable and honest when you are in that place. And then I think, well, this is just my own theory, is that it's kind of hard to shut that door after a gig as quickly as you would like to get it shut.
Yeah.
So you don't have to look at it for too long.
Yeah. So
you use it as fuel and energy to create. But then you turn it on, it's like Jumanji, isn't it?
You're almost you're almost getting in touch with the divine, the unconscious, and you hear a lot of people with near-death experience or psychedelic experiences that are very intense coming back. Even though what they saw was incredible, there's a depression. The colour is gone from life. Maybe that's partly what these deep creatives are doing. You're looking onto the face of the eternal for a second, and then finally you're at the peak, and after that you're just a person again.
Yeah, after the ecstasy, the laundry.
Exactly. It's a much more poetic way to put it.
Well, you know, you're right though, Matt, because I think that when you are in that moment and music is playing, it's just as it does, it just blows through you, you know, and it finds all those places that it needs. It's white hot, and it knows how hot you can handle it, and some people can't handle it, and so it burns them up, you know. And I've just learned how to handle it without getting burnt, you know, even though I was singed for quite a long time. It didn't completely consume me, and so now I have a more healthy relationship with it. But when you are in that moment, it is the closest state of grace. to
Yeah.
talking to whatever God you believe in. You're in conversation with something that's really sacred and old, and somehow, you know, you can't stay there. It's like being dropped out of a chopper at the top of Mount Everest. You know, you're going to be dead like within 2 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, you can't stay in that white hot place, but somehow how you conduct yourself when you come out of it makes the measure of a musician or a creator, because, you know, you're in every single note, and you give each one equal attention, rather than just playing the cool notes or the groovy notes or the sexy notes.
Yeah.
You know, the notes that'll play themselves. That I think that when you experience that really for the first time, it's not even about the note, it's the grace with which you arrive at the note and leave it. It's the space between that you play, like you glide. Really great music glides.
And you have to give thanks for that, don't you? And you have to be
totally
mindful of gratefulness. You can't bowl about saying, I did that, it was all me. There is an element maybe of, what's the word? Gratefulness maybe is the word. That's the key. Oh, this is all the language of gods, you know, eternal, all-living, indestructible music that burns you up if you stray too close to the flame. You know, this is all the language of the ancients. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I don't think I'm saying quite a lot of this just off the cuff, because it's not something that, as I say, you know, I often just find words clumsy or describe feelings so vast.
Yeah, well, I guess that's the best word for it.
I'm rambling here, just.
It sounds like performing is just such a high, a fix, which after you stop that experience must be. I mean, how you just go to bed, or how do you deal with
I'm quite
finishing
good.
a tour or finishing a gig? I mean, it's coming down.
Yeah, for years it was difficult, you know, because you're every atom is illuminated, you know, it's fizzing, and it is kind of hard to kind of dial that back in time, you know. So, but I just don't get carried away with it. I know that it's just something that I want to do and go deeper and deeper into. And especially as a someone who writes, you know, I think if you're playing someone else's tunes, you don't have that same relationship, you know, because I think you know, you become a storyteller, and you realise that everything in life that happens, you know, all the good stuff, all the bad stuff is to help to aid you to go deeper into that place, you know, as a writer. And I know that if I want to play the music that I enjoy playing, I have to look after myself, you know. I have to, you know, physically, mentally, otherwise the cracks start to appear, you know. You just like you realise one day that you're not on it as sharp as you were. And I'm, you know, 55 now, so I have to kind of change and recalibrate certain things in my life to make that possible, because I want to keep doing this. And so part of that is not to get too carried away and thinking that it's I don't like being it's a weird anomaly, because, you know, a lot of really great musicians, they want to be seen, they want to be in that light, but they're so at odds with being in that light as well. So they want to do what they do and then just, you know, fall through a trapdoor at the mic stand, you know, where they're standing, and end up back in bedroom with a slice of toast and a cup of tea. Skip the whole other, you know, the networking and socialising and hang out. Yeah, it doesn't do anything for me.
You mentioned the pandemic phase. Obviously, you and Flook had to. Well, you were on your break then anyway, weren't you? From 2000.
No, we were back.
Oh, you were back.
Yeah.
By then already.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was the emergence then during the pandemic of the Hunger of the Skin. What was that? How did that come about, and what was that about?
Well, Hunger of the Skin was just exactly what I've described. You know, it was me needing to articulate all the stuff that I was struggling with at the time. I mean, when it crashed down on top of us all, everyone reacted in a different way. Lots of pals of mine who just got jobs driving Amazon vans and walked away from music because they just thought, as I did, you know, at a time like this, you know, surely the cultural well-being of the people is also important. As a, you know, of course, you know, when you're on the front line of a major event like that, it's natural that you turn to science, and it's natural that you listen to people that are informed, you know, and specialised in that field. But it quickly became clear to me that, you know, at moments like that, surely, you know, art is a way of finding reason where there seems to be no reason for things, you know, expressing, you know, and I was devastated that it wasn't important, that people just thought, no, as long as we've got the football in the pub, who needs dance, or who needs poetry, or who needs art, who needs anything creative? Because let's face it, it's right at the bottom of the pile in our education system these days.
Yeah.
There's so little. Where we educate our kids is all based around this, you know, industrial revolution, designed way to, you know, have the sciences right at the top, the humanities, and then right at the bottom, the art. So creative arts, and so it wasn't anyone's fault, but it just seemed to be swept out the door of our lives. You know, we don't need that. So there was lots of friends of mine who just walked away, and I thought, for my own sanity, I need to play. So that was the start of Hunger of the Skin. I wasn't even thinking of writing. I just thought I need to play, I need to practice. And I started going to this place in the house every night, religiously. For a year, I never sat my hole on the sofa once to watch Netflix. It was put the kids to bed and just go straight there, a cup of tea and a candle, and write and practice. And then practice, you know, as I say, you know, that it was kind of weird, you know, because normally I would just kind of peddle old stuff, you know, and not really follow any tangent too far. But the kind of nature of the practice during the early days of pandemic was kind of it was gnarly. You know, there were kind of patterns in my fingering that I was unused to. There was asking like the incidental notes in between that weren't pretty. You know, so you're like B flat and G sharp. There you have to half hold those on a whistle because there's no key. And they were strange to me. I didn't know what it was, like a different flavour. And then it was only when the music started to come after 2 months that I realised that it had been waiting for me to get those notes sharp, because I wasn't ready 6 weeks previous.
Yeah.
And looking back, I just marvelled at the whole thing. It was everything that I felt about music manifest in that process, and then it just took over. I mean, it kicked in the door.
I was going to ask you what I got from Hunger of the Skin, and I'm not sure if this is musically accurate at all, but there's something a bit more frantic in there. The music before that, the Flook music and all that, is very melodious, all that. But I sensed that Hunger of the Skin was a bit more intense. Was that because of the nature of the time you were writing it, and the disturbance in the force around you? Almost like the music sensed the disturbance and was like, Brian Finnegan, get this music out, go.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was. I think I felt the injustice. I think that it was a defiant record to write.
That's a great word. Yeah, frantic. Defiant.
I think that I just felt that it was unfair. I wasn't. I never let my mind get in the way of writing, because I think that music writes the rules, and the only thing that you can do is stay out of the way. You can make sure that you're ready, that you're quiet, that you can handle physically what's coming, and then just kind of receive it and don't try and meddle. So that's what I did, you know. I felt it burning in me that it wasn't fair. I felt, you know, how can we be here, you know? How can we be so blind? How can we have let ourselves arrive at this moment in time as a species, you know, when our entire evolution is based around touch and contact and shared heat and shared dreams? You know, regardless of what indigenous peoples we come from, it's all the same. And yet here we are being told the rhetoric coming out of Silicon Valley that as long as we have virtual hugs and virtual friends, we're all right. It is not the same, you know. And we were all swept out of each other's arms off the street, you know, ridiculous stuff that we had to go through, pumped full of stuff that we don't even know about. That's just my spin on it, you know.
Yeah.
And I just felt it burning in me, and the only way that I could do anything about it, and the only way that I could explain to my kids why they couldn't hug their old neighbour or weren't welcome at his fire anymore, was to write about it. And then I just stayed out of the way. And a lot of people don't like that record.
Didn't
you
they?
know, no.
And that's the
You know, a
hunger.
lot of people do. And so I meet a lot of, I meet a lot of people who said that it was really transformative for them, and a lot of people who, couldn't listen to it. And
It's different.
And it was challenging. It was because it was challenging, you know, and it
Yes.
wasn't pretty.
Yeah, it's confrontational.
And I kind of, I loved getting that feedback, you know, but it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where the
because
title came from, Hunger of the Skin, because of the lack of physical contact. And
Yeah.
brilliant.
Did that elderly neighbour survive the pandemic? Is
Yeah.
he still?
Yeah, he did, yeah.
On the go?
Tony Donnelly. There's a track on the album for him. Yeah, and a video that we made on the back end of COVID as well. He's 95 next March. Mhm.
Great.
Yeah.
Just that whole thing about the sort of this virtual connections as opposed to physical, actual ones. I mean, technology has just absolutely transformed the music industry since you know, I think the first Flook record was just after the cassette era. It was the CD era. I remember buying the Flook CD, as I said, and now it's, you know, it's online, and that's how people pick up Irish music as well. I mean, not like listening to the radio or like you did when you were a kid. I mean, you've seen incredible changes during your career technologically. I mean, some good, but also some not so good as well. I mean, how has it impacted your career?
I think, you know, I mean, we're seeing now, it's kind of terrifying, slightly terrifying in the fact that, you know, the creative community are they're almost like treading water, you know. Gig fees have not increased. Like Flook, our band, who are 30 years on the go, it's a massive landmark. It's a huge achievement to be a band for 30 years. And, you know, we just were recognised by TG Cahir there. We got a Gradam Cole. We've got a big online presence. We've got a loyal fan base. And our gig fees have not gone up £1 in 20 years. Because it's all about bums on seats and a certain amount, you know, capacity to a venue. And so you just have to get wily. You have to rely on merch and having a lot of that kind of acumen around, you know, thinking outside the box. And we're blessed in Flook because, you know, Sarah, who is the other flute player, is just the most amazing woman to have in that position of power in a band. She not only musically, she glues the band together, because if she wasn't there, it would be just three blokes playing tunes. But what she does, she brings that colour, the jazz and classical, and then she makes it. She has that whole subterranean soundscape that she occupies. But she's just brilliant. She gets all the Flook gigs. She manages the bank account. She deals with contracts. She's a great person negotiating. She's very articulate in that world. She's totally clued in. You know, if we make an album, we never have to borrow a bean. She just siphons off as she goes, you know, and she it's really healthy. So yeah, no, we've kind of had to shapeshift into to adapt and improvise as the music has changed, because, as you say, now Spotify, it's just so grossly unfair what eventually filters down to musicians through that platform, through any of the online platforms. So you rely on your gigs and you rely on their merch. And, you know, we're bringing out a tune book now. So, and that is just about keeping things steady. God knows how young bands are doing it, because I mean we have all of that behind us, and we're still, you know, if we go to do, we're going in the middle of next week. We have gigs in Liverpool, and you know these venues are, you know, they're 200, 300 capacity, and we're not filling them out. You know, so there's a couple of them that are filled out, but you know you're still kind of, it's a process of trying to engage people with all of that history and all of that now, especially with the, you know, the award on the big year and the new album as well, because that always generates reviews and traction, and you know it's still an endless process of trying to make it work. Yeah.
Does that distract you from the creative business? I mean, do you you said that Sarah does a lot of that and takes care of a lot of that, but do you find yourself sort of getting bogged down in any of that?
No, not at all. No, I still, I'm lucky, and they're lucky that I'm in charge of the business, or even a small. I mean, I would do, Sarah, anytime there needs to be any kind of textual stuff, you know, blogs or notes to be written, I get the nod for my poetic streak. But normally she just kind of keeps it and manages it herself. But that's, you know, that's the lovely thing, because I write a lot of the material. Ed is really great at logistics, booking things, you know, travel, hotels, and tour routing, and he and Sarah would work more closely together than I would. They just let me rattle on and bring the music. So that's what's unique about that particular band, that everyone has a very specific role, and as long as everybody remembers, even musically, you know, we never rehearse. I think we've had like 5 rehearsals in 30 years where we've put time aside and said, right, what do we do?
What?
You
don't
are
rehearse?
We don't rehearse, yeah.
So you get together on the gig night, and how do you know what to do?
Well, you know, to be honest, we took 4 years off, and then I got a gig at the Edward Bunton Harp Festival. This is how crazy it is. In Armagh, just myself, and I thought, I'll ask Ed from Flook. So I rang Ed, and Ed said, yeah, I'll come over. And I rang John Joe, and I said, do you fancy that? And he goes, yeah, man, I'll do it, surely. And I thought, well, I can't not, you know, like that's 3/4 of the band. So I asked Sarah. Maisie was only like less than a year old, and she said, sure, if I can bring Maisie. And we landed into the Church of Ireland Cathedral at like 5 o'clock, and did one of the best gigs ever, just by playing the old stuff, because everybody knew what they were doing.
Right,
you know?
That's amazing.
I know. Yeah, so we just, like, sonically everyone's in their own space, and as long as you are on the ball, and it really works. Whereas other bands, you know, you could spend days dissecting parts and layers and stuff, and making sure that it doesn't. Yeah, and it's very arranged. Whereas Flook was free. And the other thing about Flook is that we made it also at a moment in time a conscious decision not to get distracted by effects or pedals or loops, you know. Whereas like there was a huge kind of new shift in a lot of bands live to kind of reproduce stuff that they were doing on albums, you know, by using electronics or trickery. And we just thought, no, we travelled so light, whistle in the back pocket and a burr on the guitar, you know. You don't need massive foot pedals and all of that stuff. So it's an unusual band in that.
It's like the spirit of the session, isn't it? Where you turn up to the pub with your fiddle and the other neighbours turn up too and you play. You didn't get together last week and rehearse it for 4 hours a day. So it seems like the spirit of the session is kind of stays with you guys and it works.
Yeah, I guess it's just also like 30 years playing with people. You don't have to talk about music. You just know you're kind of you're reacting to a prompt as you arrive at a particular moment.
Yeah, that's surprising, because the new Flook album, Sanju, sounds brilliant, but I got the impression that was a rehearsed bit of music. The whole it sounds great, sounds polished. It's got really good reviews. So what was the creative process there? Did you turn up to the studio and play, or was there a degree of planning to that?
Well, I mean, when I said that we don't rehearse, what is that? The process in Flook would be that I would write a piece, and again, after all these years of doing it, I'm aware that subconsciously, when music is coming to me, it's already encoded with the personality of the people that I'm playing with, and so I know quite quickly after I get a tune, not immediately, but once it settles, it's like a snow globe. You know, you're so involved in getting it. And the excitement about getting it and thinking that it's worthy. You kind of it takes a little while for it to be still enough for you can hear in the personality, and that's the thing I love about music and writing is getting a sense of who. Like, I'm standing on one side of a river, and I know that this music needs to be on the other side, but I don't have a boat. I have no way to get it there, and then I realise that it's the people that I bring in that flare it into life, you know, that it fulfil the potential of it. Because every tune is a symphony, you know. I kind of subconsciously now, when I'm writing for whoever I'm with, and so in the old days there was a lot of stuff that was just siphoned out, you know, because it wasn't good enough, or it was slightly weird and exotic chat. But now I write a lot of tunes, and I know that they'll be interesting for the lads, you know, because John Joe's without equal really in that department as a boron player. Ed is just, he's the same thing, you know, them together as a potent force. And so I'll take it. I'll give it to Sarah first, and she'll learn it. And once she's got it, and then we'll play it for the lads in a sound check, you know, and they'll start to take it apart. Maybe it'll take 3 or 4 sound checks, and then we'll just wing it and play it live and see if it works. And so we did that a little bit on Sanju, but we didn't want to play it in too much. You know, when tunes start getting a lot of road miles in them, they become very structured, and it's hard to kind of unstructure. If you want to be creative in the studio, you end up, if they feel pretty live. And because we were working with these 2 new producers, you know, who are like really, they're cutting edge electronica indie guys, you know, we just didn't want to be too rigid. If they had ideas about taking it somewhere else, that they weren't set in stone, so we didn't play them too much. But there was they had some miles in them.
Yeah. Well, there's a song in there with Ed in the title. Is this the same Ed that we're talking about?
Yeah. I kind of gift tunes to people for various.
That one
moments.
stood out to me in the whole album.
Oh, did it?
For some reason, yeah. It comes right after the Georgia.
Oh yeah.
The Wedding in Georgia tune.
Yeah.
It took me back to the 90s. The intro, the guitar intro. I was in the 90s, and I was listening to one of these acoustic songs. It takes me right back to that era. I was driving when I was listening to this, and I just came alive with that guitar riff. And
it's like Hotel California.
Yeah.
Isn't it, when you listen to the chord progression?
Yes.
Yeah.
And also a bit later 90s type music. I just can't quite define it, but I was there. I was sitting in 1990 whatever. And then once the more trad tunes overlaid instantly, then I blasted off to whatever, you know, whenever you get into the zone of a song. It took me right there very quickly, and I thought it was a brilliant piece of music, but that really stood out to me. And
Ed's Big 5-0?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
I'll tell him.
Yeah, it was a great intro and then a great overlay. So I see, I've read these reviews, and I read the one that you shared the other day, and it was very complimentary, but I genuinely understand what they're talking about there. Whenever the reviewer talks about things like Defiance and the land that he mentioned and all in that review, is this all stuff that you worked into that? Is he picking that up correctly?
I don't. You know what? I shared that review and I didn't read it. I just shared it from Flook.
Well, I will edit this bit out then.
Yeah, no. If he said it, it probably was true. What did he say?
Can I get it up?
Oh yeah, sure. Why not?
So he's saying that each composition on Sanju is rich with sonic layers rooted in the intangible essence of human experience, exploring themes of friendship, persecution, family, love and loss, as well as the cruelty and beauty of the world we live in today. I think he also mentioned a certain part of the Antrim coastal roads between County Antrim by a rich soundscape of delicate guitar pluckings, warbling woodwinds and gallivanting rhythm.
Warbling, I love that word. There's the birds for you. Yeah, I think that was probably it was partly my blog. I wrote a kind of press release, and there's been a few reviews that I did read that kind of just really regurgitated the press release and just put their own spin on it because I guess because it came from me, I knew what it meant.
Right.
What each tune meant. Whereas if a lot of reviewers are just, and it's instrumental music, so there's no lyrics, they can only surmise what the tune is about, what it means to them. Whereas,
well, I was wondering how they picked those themes out, because I couldn't quite pick those themes out. But how do you work those themes into the music, if that's what's on your mind?
Well, I mean, I don't think I work themes in to music. I just kind of craft a tune, or the tune crafts me. And it was only, Sarah wrote that first tune on Sanju, and it was very specifically for that documentary. It was a BBC documentary called "The Narrow Sea, the Farther Shore," about the trade routes and the historic family ties between West Coast Scotland and the north of Ireland. But thereafter, any tune of mine is just I don't let my mind get involved in the process at all. It's just a complete feeling thing. Mm-hmm. And quite often I'll get a tune and I'll just be stuck for a title. I didn't write it for that.
Also stuck for a theme.
Yeah.
So the music arrives, and then you look inside yourself for what is this about. I mean, I'm thinking of the tune in Sanju, which was, I think, about the Ukrainian solidarity with Ukrainian musicians. Mm. So, did you set out wanting to write something about that, or did you realise that a piece of music from within you fitted that theme? Chicken or egg, basically.
Yeah. Well, that's how it works, right? Because I kind of get the tune, and then it's a slow fermentation after that to think about, right, what do I do with it? Who's it for? What vehicle? If I'm doing different projects, if there's like writing for something, or if it's just a live thing, and I think, okay, it's a fluke tune, or it has legs for being a fluke tune, and then I think, right, well, then I think, well, what is it about? I listen more carefully to the structure of it. How, is it a story? Well, they're all stories, but what is the story? It has a start, a middle, and an end. How it feels to play it, as well, afterwards, having written it. Later, how does it feel to play it? Is it the same as it has? Does it have the same voltage, or is it more delicate, or is it changing? And then it just suggests itself to me. In the respect of that one, it was a moment when I had written the tune, and then I just saw these pictures coming out of Lvov in western Ukraine, of street corners that I'd stood on, of theatres that were in ruin that I'd played many, many times, and I had a T-shirt on. I was sitting at home, and the T-shirt was a lion. It's the symbol of Lvov. It's called the City of the Lion, and I was on fire, So that was where the burning lion came from. And then it evoked that, it became that. It had always been for that, but I didn't know. So that's kind of how it works. Yeah, it's an interesting. I wonder. I mean, I wonder is that it does a lot of creative types. Is that what they? Because if somebody sits me in a room and says, "I want you to write a tune and call it The Burning Lion," and that's what it's for, I'll be lost.
No,
it's just like trying to make stuff up for the sake of it. It was not that clever. I have to be. It's a different conversation, one where I'm very open
And that's where being humble kind of comes into the creative process in a big way. It's a defining characteristic of it, that humility.
Yeah, well, it's a long time. It's a long time. I've had to. Yeah, that's there's. I hear a lot of great tunes at the moment. Especially coming out of Scotland. Really, really, flash tunes that are going like 150. It's like so fast only dogs can hear them. And I just, when I listen to them, I think you'll get there. Right now that tune is spends way too much time brushing its hair in the bathroom mirror in the morning, trying to be cool, trying to be something, trying to be Scottish, trying to be modern, trying to be contemporary, trying. Yeah. Whereas I really think that really great music doesn't try. It doesn't have anything to prove, and that's why you believe it.
There was that story I heard you tell about the genesis of Night Ride to Armagh, where you had an experience of travelling to Armagh through a stormy night and getting delayed and missing the last bus and having to call your friend and then going, or maybe was it catching the bus, and which went then a very sort of convoluted way to Armagh. So you had this sort of strong experience and then got home eventually, and then the music just flowed immediately, or within a short space of time, which was an example of something happening to you and then immediately you wanting to create, produce.
Yeah.
So it happens like that as well.
It does. Maybe that wasn't so quick, but when it eventually came, I realised that's what it was for. It was for that night, and the powerful tug of home, that sometimes you'll just persevere whenever it's that it's worth it. But I mean, I think that a lot of music is like that. I'm kind of veering off on a tangent here. I was going to tell you something, but I got distracted by that last bus. I had to actually thumb it between Drogheda and Newry as well.
That was it.
Yeah, missed that one.
But it's a brilliant tune which goes down really well and live. I mean, I've seen this video of Night Ride to Armagh in, is it Portugal? One of the festivals of Spain.
Galicia.
And there's that shot of the crowd absolutely going bananas at it, and there's a couple of thousand people.
I know, yeah,
jumping, to the beat. It was.
Yeah, it was a bit of a mosh pit that night.
Quite a.
It's the only night there's ever been a mosh pit at one of my gigs. Yeah.
On the Ukraine thing, you've done gigs there, obviously. You've done gigs everywhere. Have you done gigs post-war?
No.
Ukraine? Since the Russians came in? No?
No.
Just before that?
Yeah, no, those doors are closed now. They won't be open again.
Right. That's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Well, can we move on then to your other the band you've been traveling with as well? I'll let you tell people about it. What's the name of the Russian band that you travel with? Or?
Well, it started off, it was the Aquarium, and now it's BG Plus.
Okay.
Yeah, Boris Grubenshikov.
Boris, yeah.
And his travelling Wilburys.
And who's he? Who's Boris?
Boris is he has many different affectionate and titles that he grew up in Petersburg. He's 71 now, and he's known as the Russian poet laureate, the godfather of Russian rock, the Russian Dylan. He's a fascinating character. He's a brilliant mathematician. Studied one of the country's brightest lights in that world. Had a scholarship in St. Petersburg, and then just got into music. Heard the Beatles, a bootleg copy of a Beatles album, and he was writing songs.
And this was in the Soviet era, so
yeah,
that couldn't have been a wholly legal copy of the Beatles that he'd obtained.
No, it was a copy of a bootleg of something else. Yeah, but somehow it made its way into Russia, and there was an underground scene in a place called Pushkinsa in St. Petersburg, where a lot of poets and musicians and actors would have gathered incognito, in the early hours of the morning and shared music and played chess and just this kind of scene. And he was part of that. And he was already writing songs at university, and then sharing them. And people, there was a real buzz around what he was doing, and so they started doing kind of underground gigs, and that's how Aquarium were born. And then they're meteoric. I think they were doing a gig in Chechnya, and
that's a gnarly neighbourhood to do a gig in there.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day when they were really starting to become famous, the police would just come in and close the gig.
Right.
The people would be arrested. I think there was a couple of stadiums set fire to one night, and it was like proper disorder. And they didn't know if they would be able to keep doing it. And then he wrote a song. I'm not quite sure. It could have been Train on Fire. Whatever it was, someone was sent from the Kremlin. He started doing these bigger stadium gigs, and they would be shut down. And then I think he had written a song, and however it got back to this character within the Duma, he really liked it, and he was sent officially to Chechnya to this gig. And then he met Boris after the concert and said, I'm giving you a path through here. I'm going to endorse your music. Don't muck it up, Right. And from that moment on, there was never any bother. The authorities left them alone, and they just that arc went exponentially through the roof. They'd roll into town and do 20,000 seater stadium and do 3 gigs in one day, and then the next day, and then move to another city. And so,
was that on the condition that there was nothing subversive?
Well, maybe on the condition that there was nothing, too provocative or names, But he was such a clever wordsmith that he was like Rumi.
Yes.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the Russian language is known for its incredible sort of depth and dexterity, and to have to choose your words carefully under pain of arrest and imprisonment or disbandment probably trained him to become. Maybe that's what contributed to his genius with words. How did you end up meeting Boris?
It's such a strange story, but it is the story. That's how it all works. But myself and Sanju from Flook were invited out to New York to play the 25th anniversary of the World Music Institute, and the MD that night was Zakir Hussain, who's a really legendary Indian tabla player. He played with everyone, Shakti, John McLaughlin, and the theme of that gig was the flute and the drum, and there was a huge amount of people from the Indian Pakistani community at the gig. And then after the show, we were just approached at stage door by these 2 guys who were followers of Sri Chinmoy. Sri Chinmoy was a teacher, an Indian mystic who had a centre and like 1.5 million followers in the US. Right. He was based out in Queens, and they were extending an invitation from Sri Chinmoy, who was at that stage in his early 80s, to come to the centre. He wanted to bestow this honour on Sanju and I, because he knew our music. And so, as a way of celebrating people who had made a contribution to world peace or sport, he was an avid sportsman, weightlifter, ultra marathon runner back in the day. Or music, he would invite them to come to his centre, and then he would perform this thing called Lifting Up the World, where he would physically lift people. There was like a platform, steps up either side, and then across the top you could stand on this little ledge, like shelf, and it would be lifted off both sides, and he would bench press, basically.
Right.
And photographers, the press, would come and take pictures of it.
Yeah.
As he got older, of course, there were a few people that helped him do that, but it was symbolic. This is my appreciation of what you do, and I want to physically lift you. Anyway, these two guys came and told us about it, and like I'd never heard his name, and so we thought we were slightly unhinged. We went, right, yeah, right, well, no worries. And then back at the hotel, I kind of Googled his name, and sure enough, I was just flabbergasted. There were pictures of him lifting Martin Luther King, Muhammad Ali, right back through time. So I was like straight on the phone the next morning going, guys, when can we come? But then, you know, there was some, maybe we just kind of missed a window, and they agreed to try and sync it the next time Flook came back through New York. Didn't work, he was in India. And then, yeah, tragically, like a year later, I read his obituary in The Guardian. A year after that, out of the blue, a phone call from a guy in London to say that they were putting on a night of celebration to celebrate his life in the Royal Albert Hall. And it was being curated by the Russian poet laureate, Boris Grubenchikov. And because word had come through from New York that Shri liked our music, would Sanju and I come and join him? And so that was how it was. Yeah.
Brilliant.
We went to the Royal Albert Hall, and the funny thing was, when I was introduced to him, the guy who was had put the gig together was called Sahadeva. Sahadev says to Boris, "Hey Boris, this is Brian from Ireland. He plays the flute. Brian from Ireland. Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming." You know, and this is Sanju. Sanju's from Manchester, and he plays the boron. Sanju from Manchester. Thank you for coming to play the boron. Yes, and then he kind of stops and he looks at us and he goes, "Brian, Sanju, Brian and Sanju. You don't play in a band called Flook, do you?" Well, he goes, "What? I've been playing your music for 15 years."
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
Maybe not 15, but he has this iconic radio show called Aerostat that went into every single house in Russia. He was a kind of John Peel kind of character.
Right,
He just shared all this amazing music with everyone across the nation, and he had stumbled across Flook years and years before, and had been playing our tracks, but had no idea that that's what was coming to the gig, you know.
So what happened after that? I imagine when that happened and that realisation happened that he was actually a huge fan of yours and playing your music, it must have been. I mean, what was your reaction to that?
I just went with the flow, which I generally tend to do and not get too carried away, you know, because after the gig in the Albert Hall, he had put a band together called Aquarium International. It was quite Indian. There was an Indian string section. Shima Mukherjee playing sitar, Alec Verma playing the tabla, and he just said, "Listen, there's a gig in Kazan, in Russia. It's a big gig. Would you like to come?" And I said, "Absolutely." Never been. And so Sanju and I went to that, and then it was just mental. You know, we ended up in Boris's in Boris's room that night, and Patti Smith was there, and you know, like I grew up on a diet of Patti Smith. You know, I couldn't believe. I just bewildered. You know, and he knew Bowie. He had recorded this because he was the first Russian artist to record an album in the West. So he signed with Island. Went to New York, lived in New York for 3 years, recorded that album. It was produced by Dave Stewart from the Eurythmics. Started hanging out with Annie Lennox, Patti Smith. Bowie was one of his best friends, you know, and the stories coming out of that time were... So the album he made, Radio Silence, was absolutely categorically rejected back in Russia because they all said he'd sold out. It was in English. The only album he ever did in English. And then when he went back to Russia and recorded, I think it was his Russian record, he was able to go back into that world, and because that's it was critically acclaimed as his best album ever, the one after the English one. But yeah, I just, you know, because I didn't grow up around him, I didn't get the aura. For me, he was just this beautiful man, you know, who had a fantastic humour and just such a wise counsel in so many ways, you know, and he took me under his wing and it became a father figure to me, you know. He just loved everything that I did, that he just wanted me to be myself. It was like every night, these songs are new, they're yours, you know. The weirder they are, the more you know, the better for me. which is like so unique for a big star to not be interested in control. Because I've been around enough big stars to know this, like the smallest detail, that's what I want you to do, and I don't want you to do anything else. I want that note in the same place. Boris, I want all those notes in different places if you want. And so I just I went with it, and I met a lot of people who were in that circle who were famous and actors and movie stars, directors, and because I didn't know who they were, I was totally relaxed. They were just friends of Boris, and that's a nice way to get in. I saw Russia through his eyes, and the Russia that I saw was the real Russia. It wasn't Putin's idea of Russia. It was the people, the heartbeat, the spiritual heartbeat of Russia. There's a place in Russia called Suzdal, which is generally acknowledged as the belly button of Russia. It's where a lot of the church, the religious center of that part of Russia. And Boris used to do gigs there. There was just such regard for him wherever he went that it was just when you visit Russia and you're visiting as a tourist, there's a feeling that there's like people surround themselves in armor. They just it's very hard to penetrate and get to know people in that way. Whereas you're standing on a stage and the music just opens, they're illuminated, and you can see this other side of them that you wouldn't see. So it was, I loved being part of that story with him.
You spent a lot of time in Russia. From when to when was that? What period are we talking?
I joined. The Albert Hall gig was in 2008,
Mm-hmm.
so it was since then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It's so tragic now that he can't go to Russia, can he? At the minute, he's fallen out.
Oh no, he's been declared an enemy of the state and a foreign agent and all sorts, a traitor,
And you've had a few hairy experiences on the back of that since the Ukraine war.
Yeah, no, I mean, sometimes I wonder, is it just hot air? But it's like there was a definite dark experience last year, coming off the back of some gigs in Australia. We were meant to fly to Thailand, and then there was a band that had just been arrested in Thailand in the month previous, and the only thing that spurred them being deported back to Russia was the fact that two of them were Israeli, and they were able to get to Israel, but pretty dark, And at that stage, Boris was already, he'd done hard talk, he'd revealed his card,
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't mincing his words. He was like a very vocal critic of the regime and what was happening. And then, we were on our way to Thailand, and we realised that was a bad move, so that was cancelled. And then we put in some gigs in India at the last minute to kind of fill the space between India and Bali. And then, we all got our visas, and we went ahead of Boris and his wife Irina. And while they were in the air, his visa was revoked, which means he was landing in Bangalore without an active visa. And the only way to get an active visa was to go out through immigration. So he was going to have to clear passport control, and Russian Secret Service were waiting at passport control for him. They'd realised what flight he was on, contacted, they've got these treaty rights with India, so they'd said, this guy's coming, he needs to be detained and arrested, and we're going to deport him. And he would have went the same way as Navalny, absolutely. It would have been drawn out, the life would have been sucked out of him. Anyway, so we got word of this because a message came through to his manager, we were already in India. We'd come through Mumbai to Goa, that the visa was revoked, and we managed to. So we started ringing. We knew what time he was landing in Bangalore. His phone didn't connect, so him and his wife were in first class, and they were heading down towards immigration. And the only thing that saved us was the fact that our sound technician was at the back of economy and had his guitar, and was literally hammering people to get out of the way, when it started to disembark. He knew he had to try and catch him before he reached immigration. And literally it was like a spy movie. Jonathan was running He just threw his bags and just screamed, "Get out of my way!" Ran down this corridor and caught him like within like 80 yards of immigration. Put him on the phone to his manager, who said, "Go to transit. Don't go anywhere near immigration. You're neutral when you're in transit." And he sat there for 12 hours until they got a flight to Paris.
Wow.
Enormous.
Yeah, but we were in it when we were in Goa. A policeman, an Indian policeman, came to the venue of the first gig and said, "You need to get this to this artist who's coming. I'm risking everything, but I wanted to show you this letter." And it was from the Russian Parliament, official letter to say arrest that man.
Wow. So if he hadn't have come to
if he hadn't have, well, there was lots of what ifs, but
Jesus.
yeah, they were after him.
Yeah. It fascinates me no end that, we have this international intrigue of Vladimir Putin and Boris and all of these other things. And then in a drawer somewhere around there's Brian Finnegan from Armagh. I'd love to know what they make of that, what they make of these associates. Do they look into you guys?
I'm sure
do they listen to Flook?
I'm sure. I've no doubt they don't. But I'm sure my name has come up a few times, maybe because I've many Russian visas over the years.
We're going to add an international man of mystery here to all the other titles here.
My poison darts and the old whistle. Yeah, in and out.
And where is he now then, Boris? Is he?
Well, right now he's in London. He lives in London. Yeah, he moved to London 2 years before the Russian invasion. He has his finger on things, so he didn't like the direction it was going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's played in Armagh as well.
Yeah.
He played recently.
Yeah, he did. He started his big tour in Armagh.
What do you think of that? How was the gig?
It was great. Yeah, there was quite a few people ringing up saying "where," because I think that was like. On the list, it was Glasgow, the Clapham Grand in London, and Armagh, Armagh. So lots of Russians going, "Can't find that one on the map." It was great, It was there was lots of people surprisingly came from afar. A couple from Lithuania, and yeah.
And he was in Red Neds, wasn't he? And if you,
Oh, he loves Red Neds.
He loves Red Neds.
Yeah.
The Russian poet laureate loves Red Neds.
I'll tell you a funny story about Red Neds, because he had a Celtic quartet, himself, me, John Joe from Flook, and another Kelly from down south, Alan Kelly, on the piano accordion. And we did a couple of seasons around all the big gigs, went to Russia and Europe. And then he came to Dublin, and it was my birthday the next day. Played the gig, and I said to him, "Listen, I'm just going to organise a session in Red Neds for my birthday." And he'd never been in a session. And I said, "Do you fancy coming?" And he goes, "I'm right there, absolutely." I said, "Bring the guitar, Boris, and you could sing a song." Absolutely. So he landed. So I rang up a few people, and a few people rang a few other people, and there was about 25 players, really good players, landed into Red Neds. It was packed. And Boris came in, I probably shouldn't be saying this to the world, but he managed to feed my ma space cake. She had this kind of, I don't know where he got it, but it was like, she was chomping away on this space cake, thinking I was drinking gin and tonics, and I was looking at her going, I have never seen my ma so animated, and nor have I seen her drinking gin and tonic. What is going on? And then the next thing I looked around, and both her and Boris were like that. Their arms out, looking at the roof. He had his dark sunglasses on, and he was just like, he was lost in the music, and the music was really, it was like the place was levitating, the power in it, really great players in the middle of a session. The spirit just takes over. And now and again, one of my friends would say, "When's he going to sing?" And he had no intention of singing. But, at the end of the night and the next day, and ever since, he said it is one of the top 5 musical moments of his entire life.
Wow.
He said it was like discovering the Beatles. Again, being in that session. He just said it was like, he can't find the words for it. It was like transcendental. The way that it just lifted him up and put him back down. It was like the ocean. And he was just carried. And he's given lots of interviews since where I've seen it mentioned, Red Neds.
Wow.
Yeah.
Any recording of that?
No, I don't think there was, no.
Damn.
I'm infinitely devastated that I wasn't there.
I know, you would have loved it, Matt. My God.
Brian, I want to ask you before we wrap up. You've travelled the world. You're a musician of world renown. you live in Armagh, you settled in Armagh, your hometown. You happy here?
Yeah. Yeah, I am. I love Armagh. You know, I invested quite a lot of my time when I was in my teens to get out of it. I just wanted to see the world, you know, and explore, and I just felt I needed to, do that traveling. But, you know, it really is a like night ride to Armagh. It is a very powerful force of nature, the pull of home, kith and kin, the place that you grew up in, the vibration of the land. And I live out near the Navan, and it is I just can't think of anywhere that brings me more peace and stillness than walking those fields and those lanes around between my house and Navan Fort. It is really important to me. My grandfather Malachy was on the Dudley Waterman dig of excavation of Navan, and so it has a long history between the Finnegans and the Wards. They were equidistant. My dad's home place, and my mum was born in Ballacrummy, so they were exactly the same distance from the Navan. They used to court on top of the Navan. So I just love it. I mean, who knows what the future holds? I might end up some far-flung corner of the world when there's no one else, when everyone's flown the nest. Yeah, but yeah, it's an open book.
Brian, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for giving us so much of your time this morning. I think we could have just kept on talking for a lot longer, but I'm afraid to say, or happy to say, because it's the first time we've said it in this podcast, that's about the height of it. Badoom Tish. Thank you very much, Brian, and our producer, Stephen Lynch. And we'll see you all next time.